Jack Reacher is a character created by English author Lee Child, at a time in his life when he really was at a loose end. Having just lost his job working for Granada Television, he decided that to make ends meet and put food on the table, he would become a writer, and so he sat down to write what was to become something of a literary juggernaut, Jack Reacher. But before I get started, please consider subscribing, as that would really help me out, and if you like this content, give it a like. The character of Jack Reacher has become iconic, and while the books may not be great literary works on the level of Anna Karenina or Lord of the Rings or even Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but what they are commercially aware revenge stories. They're about an unstoppable force in the shape of a 6'5" man mountain who has brains as well as brawn. And thanks to a previous life as a tough, no-nonsense military policeman from the elite 110th Special Investigations Unit, he has the experience and self-assurance to get things done. Reacher is a series of tropes all fitted together into something that people want more of. In this day of gender fluidity and the taking away of classically male role models, and the huge lack of anything resembling masculine role models, here's a breath of fresh air, harking back to the days of errant knights looking for the proverbial lady in distress. And you know what? He finds them. And what is more important to society at large is that this is what women really want in the first place. They don't want a beta male who doesn't have the physicality or confidence to stand up to the bullies of this world. Women don't want someone who, when they're out at a bar getting a drink and some rowdy drunk either gets a bit handsy or insults their womanhood in some way, tries to pretend he's not there and meekly sits pretending he hasn't seen anything or heard anything while his woman is being treated like a piece of meat. A woman wants a guy who will stand up and defend her physically if necessary. They want to know that the man they're with isn't just window dressing. He needs to be proactive and willing to at least try to defend her honour, even if he isn't a match for her antagonist. And yes, women will often want to hold their men back and say, "Leave it, he's not worth it, Gary." While the men square up and see if either are willing to put their fists where their mouth is, and most of the time that's where it ends. Men may appear stupid, but they are aware that if things get carried away, one of them, or even both of them, are going to get pretty hurt. Jack Reacher is the guy men would like to think that they could be if they were to find themselves in the craziest situations that he often becomes involved in. We all want to be able to rescue the fair maiden. We all want to be able to rain down vengeance upon the evildoers. We all want to be able to get the job done and come out of the other side mostly unscathed. I say that in parenthesis because Jack Reacher doesn't always remain unscathed. In one case he took 38 special to the chest, but survived because he had been digging swim pools that summer and had built up even more pectoral muscle than usual. In another, he had his nose broken, and he has numerous scars, but he always wins. It is in men's nature, built into their very DNA, to be protectors and avengers. And while we are rarely given cause or necessity to take things into our own hands in this sanitized modern world, Jack Reacher is a fantasy knight-errant character that men can aspire to, even if only in our imaginations. A chance for that part of our souls that cries out for righteous action and vengeance against all that is unjust, despicable and amoral to have free reign. A way to slake our need to rescue the damsel in distress. To protect those weaker than ourselves. To see those that would choose to harm our women and children brought to violent, unwavering, relentless justice. Or at the very least a sticky end. We live in a time where there are many places and people within our society that could benefit from a visit by a man like Jack Reacher. We read about horrible events in our newspapers. We see the cover-ups by police and other corrupt organisations as they protect those that have wronged, persecuted and committed downright evil acts upon the weakest within our society. And we're forced to sit on our hands while inside us our souls writhe and burn with indignation, as the beast that calls for the blood of the guilty to be spilt upon the altar of vengeance and honour is forced to scream furiously into the void, because if we act, then we are the ones that will be punished, because justice isn't blind. No, it's a hammer used by those in power to keep us under the yoke of an agenda that is destroying the social fabric of our world and forcing us to watch as all that we hold dear is degraded and belittled and made to appear backward while trying to make us seem like ists or phobes. Rant over. Jack Reacher is a character that deserves to be represented on screen, certainly more so than most of the worthless dross that we've been forced to endure in the last few years, some of which we thought we liked, until Hollywood took away everything that made them compelling and interesting characters and turned them into barely recognisable caricatures of what they once were. For a long time, it seemed as though Jack Reacher was never going to make his big screen debut. And to be fair, finding someone that could match up to his imposing dimensions was always going to narrow the range of possibilities. And so, after a long wait, an actor came along who wanted the role and who was a perfect match for our strapping 6'5" character. That's right, Tom Cruise got the role. Whenever I think of muscle-bound guys, I always think Tom Cruise. Not Hulk Hogan, not The Rock, not this guy. No, I think Tom Cruise. Because if there is one person who can stand on a box and not look like he is standing on a box, it is Tom. Yeah, no, Tom Cruise was a terrible choice for Jack Reacher, because while he has the talent to act the role, he simply does not have the physicality to embody the character. It'd be like this person playing Anne Boleyn. It's unthinkable. Oh, no, wait, they did that. Okay. It would be like this girl playing Ariel in The Little Mermaid. Oh no, they did that too. Okay, then it would be like getting black people to play elves and dwarves in The Lord of the Rings. No, wait. They did that too because apparently accurate casting no longer matters. Anyone can play anything, even though also no one can play anything unless they are that exact thing, according to Hollywood. Apparently, Tom Cruise is a big fan of the Jack Reacher books, and with his Cruise Wagner production company, bought the film rights way back in 2005. So when he finally got the movie production off the ground, he wanted the title role for himself. Which is understandable, because what man wouldn't want to be Jack Reacher, or at least make believe that he is? The first Jack Reacher movie, starring the diminutive Tom Cruise, made a good profit. And Tom wasn't half bad in the role, but he wasn't Reacher. He was playing some alternate universe Reacher where he'd been stunted at birth and lost a foot of height, and all of his menacing presence. When Tom walks into a room, you didn't feel as though everyone was suddenly on edge thinking, oh shit. No, instead you got the impression they were thinking, what shall I have for dinner? The movie did well enough that it got a sequel, but that was where the good news ended because the sequel was not great. And while Tom is a decent actor, he couldn't save a movie that just didn't have anything going for it. And those fans that had given it a chance, for the most part realised that these weren't Jack Reacher movies, even if they were pretty decent crime movies. And so they had abandoned it too. But the nail in the coffin of the movie franchise came from Lee Child himself, who had a clause in his contract that said he could end the franchise after 2 movies. And since Lee Child cares about what his fans think, he decided to end the movie franchise and start again. So Jack Reacher was again left in limbo, with no visual media to call home. That was until Amazon answered the call, and after what has been described as a competitive situation, they won the rights and greenlit a TV series all the way back in late 2019. And then, of course, COVID hit us, and so everything went to hell in a handbasket, with Amazon's Reacher series finally being released on the 4th of February 2022. And you know what? It was worth waiting for. Finally, someone listened to the fans, and we were given a series featuring a protagonist who actually fits the role, in the shape of Alan Ritchson, who you may remember from, hold on a sec while I look up IMDb. Well, Titans, I guess? I seem to remember I watched season 1 and wanted to hurl. Oh, there you go. He played Aquaman in Smallville. Anyway, he is a mountain of a man who, while not really being quite as big as Jack Reacher at 6'2", he certainly looks the part. He isn't a pretty boy, but he isn't ugly. He has a kind of chipped out of a lump of granite look that I always associated with Reacher in my mind. He towers over most of the rest of the cast, and you know that when he walks in a room, everyone is going to take notice and think, damn, that dude is huge. And not only is he big, he has the muscles to go with it. In the book, Reacher is described as being naturally ripped and strong, without ever going to any kind of gym or watching what he eats. Ritchson manages to come across in much the same way, and it is a very welcome change from the sort of Hollywood mismanagement of choosing who is popular rather than who is suitable for the role. But before I talk about the cast, let's talk about the program itself. It's based on the very first Jack Reacher book, rather than Tom Cruise's movie, which was based on the 9th book in the series. So we actually get to start from the beginning, which is another example that this series is being taken seriously by the producers, and not just picking and choosing the bits that they think will sell best. Lee Child himself says that they intend to film the books in order, which is just fantastic because the characters can really grow into the roles, which I think will make for an even better show a few years down the line, assuming the viewing figures hold up that long. But then I guess that comes back to them remaining faithful to the stories and holding the fans' interest. I was surprised and happy that the series was actually reasonably faithful to the book. It is perhaps a little less brutal, but they pulled a lot less punches than I thought they would. After all, this is Hollywood, and they try to market everything to as wide an audience as they can manage, even if that means diluting the story to the point where it has little resemblance to the source material, and something that should have been adults only is labelled suddenly as open to 12-year-olds. The story is interesting enough that even if you aren't a dyed-in-the-wool Jack Reacher fan, the series is still worth watching because it is compelling enough for those wanting a crime drama and action-y enough for those that just want to see some ass-kicking. Reacher, being the unstoppable beast that he is always going to be worth a watch as far as violence goes, because the books are replete with his exploits of punishing evildoers. The violence, as written, is graphic enough to make you squirm. He's an avenging angel, a knight-errant combined into an almost Sherlock Holmes-like figure who follows his own code of morals and mores, which inevitably bring him into conflict with the lowlives that he manages to meet on a regular basis. He has been out of the army for 6 months before the events of this series and has only recently adjusted to civilian life after spending his early life as a service brat, following his dad from base to base. He then joined the army and spent another 13 years doing whatever the army told him to, which in the end turned out to be a detective for the 110th Special Investigations Unit. So he is well suited to the sort of situations he finds himself in, since, as it is pointed out in the book, and I quote, "A military policeman deals with military lawbreakers, highly trained in weapons, sabotage, unarmed combat, rangers, green berets, marines, not just killers, extremely well trained at huge public expense. So the military policeman is trained even better." Which is why Jack Reacher is equal to any situation, regardless of the odds and the position he finds himself in. And this first story is also very personal for him. We are even given a basic idea of his life's history with his family, which was a nice touch, as they could have just glossed over all these details as not important and instead concentrated only on the action. But the program really does seem to be trying to introduce us to him in a more personal way and help us to become invested in the character for what I hope will be many future series. In this story, Reacher finds himself in a small town called Margrave, looking for some information about a long-dead blues guitarist named Blind Blake. No sooner does he set foot in the local diner than he becomes embroiled in a homicide investigation that goes sideways very quickly, to the point where not only does he have to fight for survival, but he also has to fight for honour and family, the sort of things which men have fought over for millennia. But the bad guys hadn't counted on a retired military policeman with the tenacity of a honey badger, the strength of a bear, and a bulldog spirit imbued into a classic American hero by a British author. The story hums along nicely, with a good balance of action to exposition. There are moments in which you feel that the story is being told to you rather than shown through actions, but this is actually in line with the books, where we will often be listening to Reacher's inner monologue as he considers his actions and figures out the details of what he has become involved in. Having Lee Child on the production team no doubt saves this from becoming just another action series about a guy who helps people that have gotten themselves into trouble with the wrong kinds of people, helped by a team of blah 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 run-of-the-mill action series. The focus of this story is, as it should be, on Jack Reacher. Yes, there are other characters, and they are actually really good in this program, but they are peripheral, and they stay that way instead of dragging the story in a direction it was never intended to go because of some Hollywood agenda. Speaking of the other characters, let's just take a quick look at them. First, we have Willa Fitzgerald as Roscoe Conklin, a young female policewoman who takes her job seriously and befriends Reacher after he is wrongfully arrested. She becomes Reacher's right-hand girl as he solves the mystery of Margrave, and is, other than having the wrong hair colour, a dead ringer for the corresponding character from the book. Next up is Malcolm Goodwin as uptight fish-out-of-water Oscar Finley, the Chief of Detectives, a strange title really considering that he is the only detective in the Margrave Police Department. He is a Harvard-educated man who ended up in Margrave due to a series of unfortunate events in his personal life, and he is superbly played by Malcolm Goodwin. I found him to be one of the best characters in the series. He fit the role so well that he is basically indistinguishable from the book. Bruce McGill plays Mayor Teal, and he is as slimy and icky as you would expect from a career politician. Again, a fantastic piece of casting, and a very solid actor, who has been around the block enough times to not be a letdown in pretty much any role. Then we have Chris Webster as KJ, or the Kleiner Kid, as he's been ingrained into my mind from the book. And it has to be said that Chris Webster really does manage to have that kind of psycho, just about under control, crazy person look down pat. He always looks as though he is about to do something violent, which is just right for the character, though the only thing that lets it down is that he doesn't have a big enough physical presence to feel as though he is any kind of threat to Reacher. We have Kristin Crook as Charlie Hubble, and she is fine, but I can't figure out why they decide to make both of her children girls instead of one boy and one girl as in the book. Not important really, just a bit strange. Finally, and to my great annoyance, I have to mention Maria Sten as Frances Neagley. Yes, I said Neagley, not Neely, because that is how it is written, and until I actually meet the girl who the character is based on, and she tells me different, that is how I will say it. She is a kind of female version of Reacher, that in the books is one of the few people that Reacher admires, as being kind of an equal to himself. She was a very talented soldier who was in the military police squad that Reacher was in charge of. But what she absolutely isn't is a character that is meant to be in this story. Frances Neagley only turns up in about 4 of the Jack Reacher books, and her first appearance isn't until book 6, so her being here is out of place. And it feels as though she is there so that they can squeeze a super tough woman of colour into an otherwise well thought out, well cast series. Speaking of the casting, I am sure that Hollywood loved the name Neagley, because it has a kind of ethnic sound to it. And of course, it is an ethnic name. It's ethnically European, probably from Ireland. So it is curious that they decide to go with a mixed race actress for the role, especially considering all the descriptions of Neagley describe her as tanned, which is not a common description for someone whose skin is permanently a darker hue. On top of that, instead of a female of medium height, they went with a woman who is tall. She should not, even when wearing heels, appear nearly as tall as Jack Reacher. Apart from that, I didn't like her physical appearance. They seem to be trying very hard not to let her appear attractive and feminine, which in my mind would go against the nature of her character, since she is described as being very attractive and looks very feminine, regardless of whether she is a scary badass. It is very demeaning to think that women can't be badasses and look like women. Instead, they have to look more like men, which is ridiculous. It is the one aspect that feels woke, which is a shame, as the rest of the program is reasonably faithful to the book, although perhaps they decide to make her look terrible so that at a later date they can show her looking attractive, since Maria Sten can look pretty good if she tries. I also got the impression that they were angling to make her lesbian or non-binary or something silly like that, which would also be ridiculous, as it is apparently very obvious to most other women in the books that she is in love with Reacher, or at least extremely attracted to him. Sadly for her, she suffers from haphophobia, which is a chronic fear of being touched, so she can never manage more than a quick hug or kiss, and so can never really act on her feelings. Instead, she relegates herself to being what passes for Reacher as his best friend, which must be very hard for her since they have to act all buddy-buddy, even though they both know there is more to it than that, at least for her. Okay, mini rant over. I have to say that even with a couple of small defects, this really is a great series, and one that I am looking forward to seeing more of, since Season 2 has already been given the go-ahead. I will be interested in seeing how they will bring Book 2 to the small screen, since it is a very different kind of story, and not really a crime drama at all. Finally, Reacher is the kind of hero we need in this modern age of weak-willed, lily-livered beta men that seem incapable of standing up for their own immutable characteristic, let alone the very natural masculine tendencies that we as the more physically dominant half of the species are naturally apt to lean into. It is nice to see someone that is no nonsense and just does what is right, regardless of the bloody consequences, and does not feel the need to pander to any agendas. Let's just hope that Lee Child, and anyone else on the roster that actually cares for the fans of this larger-than-life character, can keep Hollywood from getting their grubby little mitts on him and twisting what has the basis of a good series into what Hollywood would prefer to see. This has been Movies Suck, hoping that nobody messes with the special investigators. Signing out. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the flip side.